But yesterday actually the project was not getting built, I guess. I didn't make any changes, so if you see over here, I've added two attributes. One is like not empty, other one is size as usual. And then okay, we are having this class and the JSP pages. This thing as usual. So right click, so over here if you click onto this register customer, model and object view is created. Let me just minimize this. Submit query. Must not be empty and the size must be between 2 and then something. The maximum value for the integer it is specifying. So because we have only specified min, and then again you can specify it as maximum is equal to 2. Let us try the message over here. Message is equal to first name is 0. First name should be between min and max. Let me just test it one more time. Click over here, register customer, and then submit query. Sorry. So your first name should be between first. So this is the message it is giving. 2 and what is the other message? Okay, min and max, okay, we kept it as 2 and 2, that is why we are receiving that. So it is taking the fully qualified name of the class. Let me do it this way. First name, So string support dot default message resolvable customer dot first name arguments default messages like first name should be between 20 and 2. Clear with this?
Yes. Atika,
Hmm.
can you send us the demo code of this test program through OneDrive so that we'll understand it more clearly, like whatever we are writing and everything?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Like yesterday also we have done the same thing. I don't know like why it did not execute it.
Yeah, you said like you updated the Spring
Hmm.
Suite, right? So it might be the problem with that again.
Might be. For same stuff, I did not change anything. Okay,
Okay.
so in one more concept what we have in the Spring is Spring with Hibernate. But as we did not start the Spring Hibernate concept, okay, we will just postpone this topic after we cover few topics of Hibernate. Then we will be discussing Spring with Hibernate. And along with that, okay, you need to start now working on the project. What I suggest you is you can go with like if you have some documentation you can go ahead with that. Otherwise I'll send you a documentation for creating the online test engine. So in the online test engine some part of that okay is uh, 1 minute, let me check whether I have downloaded. Yeah, I'll share this document. I've downloaded this from web. So you need to create an online test engine. I'll just show you the mock-up screens. So you're having the complete source requirement specification for this. You just need to go through this. So this way it has like you need to provide the login screen for this online test engine. You need to have the create question and the question bank. People those who are authorized to add the questions will have access to these screens. And then okay, this should be this is how your screen should look like for adding the questions. HTML screens you need to create and creating the test like start date and then stop date, what type of question should come, like how many questions, so all these details. And then you should add the test. Once the test is created, then you need to decide how many people, who are the people who are going to take the test. If you click on this, link should be activated for those people and they should be able to take the test. And this okay, you have the question bank. If you want to update the question or you want to like after you have added the question, you should be able to update, delete, modify the question bank. And this is the model we have. So using this model, okay, you need to use a type, username, password, login, and like these are the classes what you require. And then the relationship similarly, like when we are going with the Hibernate, okay, it will be very much easy for us to write the database operation. So let us do it using Spring and Hibernate. And then the analysis diagram, everything is given. So I'll be sharing this document with you people, so start working directly. You can, so you don't have to write any, you don't have to analyze the project, it has been already done. You can straight away start with the implementation of the project because we have already done with the Spring. Okay, you can start with the UI and validation and all, you can do it. And then again from today onwards, okay, we'll be starting with the Hibernate. So for performing database specific operation, you will be going with the Hibernate. So after we get done with the class, I'll share this document with you. Please start working on this. Okay, now let us start with the Hibernate. Hibernate, like it is very much easy. Now, most of the modern programming languages, they have like object-oriented concept. Now, in the object-oriented, the reason we have moved to the Hibernate is prior to Hibernate, this EJB was the enterprise Java beans, but programming with the EJB API was not very good. It has got huge problems in that, and like understanding the EJB API is difficult, and the API was not well documented and it is not well written. It was having many performance loopholes. So because of that, the people have started for the alternative, and then Hibernate is the result of that. And the reason you go for the Hibernate is like in the traditional Java-based programming, what we have, the traditional Java-based programming means like JDBC programming. If you say you need to write this class state for name, connection, and all, so that will take a huge lot of time. So rather than that, rather than going with the traditional style of JDBC programming, you have people have adopted this Hibernate style. So we will be discussing how this is useful when you are developing the project. So let me open up the another presentation. Now over here you have got like object, basically, okay, this one ORM, this is called as Hibernate, it is called as ORM, that is object relational mapping. Now when we are creating the object model, you have got classes, and then okay, you have got relationship among the classes. And then when you are creating the relation model, you have got tables, and then again you have got, uh, and we establish the relationship among the tables. But when it comes to the object model, you have got abstraction, encapsulation, polymorphism, inheritance, association, and the composition. These are the different types of relationship that exist in the object model. But in the relation model, we have just got primary and then the foreign key relationship. We don't have any other relationships in this. So when we are programming, we use RDBMS for persisting our data. But the only relationship what we can establish is, and between the object and the relation model is the primary key and then the foreign key relationship. Now, how are we going to map this? Abstraction, encapsulation, polymorphism, association, and composition. We are having the other types of relationship. So we will not be able to map this. So there is the difference between the object model and in the relational model, because we have got more types of relationship in the object model and we have got only one type of relationship in the relational model. So this mismatch between these two models is called as impedance mismatch. So there is a mismatch in this too, because over here you are having a whole lot of relationships, over here you are having only a primary key and then the foreign key relationship. So there is a mismatch between these two models, and that is called as impedance mismatch. So in order to resolve this impedance mismatch, or in order to overcome the impedance mismatch, we have come up with a new framework, that is ORM, Object Relational Mapping, that will address this issue. Now, in order to object relation mapping, it will map the Java objects to the database, and the mapping is done to tables using annotation in the mapping file. That is, you're mapping the Java objects to the table in the database with the help of the simple statement, with the help of the annotation in the mapping. And all these points we have, like, we will be going to discuss this later. It will shield the complexity of the SQL statements. You can create the objects directly, and it removes the code to access the database layer. So over here, let's say you are having an object. This object is mapped directly to the table in the database. So this is an object. It is directly mapped to the row in the table. So how do you map this? Over here, if you see, you are having an object. And then, okay, you want to store this object directly into the table without writing any statements. So that is done with the help of ORM. ORM, as we said, stands for Object Relational Mapping. So how are we going to map this? Because Java is an object-oriented language, and whereas database is a relational database management system we are using. So that is all the information is stored in the tables. So there is a whole lot of uh, difference in how the information is represented in two different languages. So we take help of a file that is called as mapping file in order to map object to the table in the database. I repeat, we take the object relational mapping framework will take help of a mapping file that will help you map object to the uh, table in the database. So when you're using this ORM framework, you need not write any queries. You need not write any queries. ORM framework will write the queries for you. You need not write any queries. The object relational mapping framework will write the queries. And then again, you don't have to write this code also, class.forName, etc. This boilerplate code, you don't have to do it because the ORM, the underlying ORM framework will do it for us. So it is pure relational, light object mapping, medium object, and the full this one. Pure relational is an application is designed around the relational model. Light object mapping is entities are represented as classes and they are mapped manually to the relational tables. That is what we have done in the JDBC. Medium object mapping is application is designed using an object model and SQL is generated using code generation utilities. uh, and that full object mapping is you will be able to map all the relationships and the object model to the relation database. So advantage productivity is higher because development time decreases. You don't have to write any queries. Prototyping is easy because once your object model is ready, you can generate the relational model from that. Vendor independence is you can easily switch from one database to the another database because ORM it supports multiple databases, and maintainability is good because code is configured and less maintenance. I'll tell you what do we mean by coding is configured. And you should not use ORM for the application that uses a single database and for the single queries. And sorry, overhead is like app that use a single database and simple queries. You should not go for this. And for large batch updates, it has got slower performance. ORM is a framework. There are various people or various vendors who provide implementation for that. Hibernate, Versant, Toplinks, Ibatis. These are the most object-oriented mapping. These are the various frameworks that are available, but Hibernate is the most popular one. Now over here, simple. You've got database over here, and you have the application. Persistent objects. That is, you have to store this object from here to here directly. That is okay. You will create the objects in your application, and this objects has to be persisted in the database. And the framework what we are using is this one. Hibernate is the framework. So this framework will make use of your XML mapping file and the other properties file in order to save the objects. So for this purpose, you have got the Hibernate API, you have the session object, session itself. This is responsible for persisting the objects. We will discuss about this. And then it supports JDBC, it supports JNDI, it supports JTA. On top of this, okay, your application will run wherein your transient objects will live. We will discuss about the transient objects and then the persistent object. Now, as we said, this is all your Hibernate API, and then okay, you're having all this JNDI, and then JDBC, and then Java Transaction API. Now you've got JNDI, we have got JDBC. Now like when we have done the JDBC programming, we have worked at the low level layer. That is okay, we were writing all the queries by ourselves. But when you are going with the Hibernate, you will work on this layer. You will work on this layer. So your Hibernate will shield the complexity of this layer. Hibernate, it will shield the complexity of this layer. You will not be working on this layer, JNDI, JDBC and JTA. You will work on this layer. You will be using the Hibernate APIs, and Hibernate API will shield the complexity of this. That is your Hibernate application. Let me erase. So the Hibernate application, let's say for connection provider, it is just you will just have a class that is connection provider, but this connection provider internally it will use this JNDI. For performing JDBC relation operation, you have got the session API that internally it will use this JDBC. And then again you've got the transaction API that internally will use this JTA, Java Transaction API. But as a programmer working with the Hibernate, okay, you will be working with this layer only. So that is what it will say, abstracts the application away from the underlying JDBC, JTA APIs, as you will be working on this layer, on the layer above it. So configuration. Now as we said, first you need to configure the application. So in order to configure the application, we have a class that is called as configuration itself. So in the configuration class, in the configuration class, you will use your driver name. You need to provide the URL, you need to provide the username, and you need to provide the password. So these are the configuration elements you need to provide to the configuration class. Once you provide this details to the configuration class, then this configuration, like once the object is created, once this is created, then this will be used by the session factory. That is, this configuration will be linked or connected with the session factory. So once the session factory will have all this, then it will create the session objects. It will create a pool of session objects using which you will be able to perform the transactions. So if you see over here, you've got Hibernate configuration file. Within that, okay, you're having session factory. In the session factory, you're writing all the configuration related data, the driver class, URL, username, and then the password. URL, username, and the password. So this information will be used by the configuration class, and once it creates an object out of that, it will read all this and it will create an object out of that, and this configuration object will be used by the session factory to create the session object. I repeat, if you see this, all this configuration related elements are being used by the session factory to create a session factory object. So one session factory is associated with one database. Now we will discuss what is the session factory. So one session factory is associated with one database. So instance of the configuration class is created only once during, okay, you will have only one configuration object for the complete application. And if you see, it will have driver name, URL, username, and the password that is used for establishing the connection. And this configuration object, it is used by the session factory and discarded after the creation of the session factory. So once this object is live, once this object is created, this object is discarded. Now next, what is session factory? It is a global object for maintaining the session objects. It is used for creating and opening a session to communicate with the database, and a session factory is created and configured separately for each database being connected. So okay, over here if you see, you have got the session factory. So this session factory will make use of this configuration object, and this one is associated with this database. After this object is created, this object is destroyed. This is your configuration object. This object will be destroyed. Session factory, it is used for pooling the JDBC connections. Session factory, it is used for pooling the JDBC connections. So you will have all the JDBC connection objects over here. Session objects you will have all session of objects. So this session objects are required for opening and connecting, for opening and closing the connection with the database. So let me make use of this one. So these are the session objects 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's say you're having an application. Now when you have an application and this application wants to interact with the database. When this application wants to interact with the database, you require the session objects. You require the session objects. So what you will do is you will pick one of the session objects, because this session factory will have all the instances of the session now objects. It is a pool for the session objects. Now, oh shit, it has become very clumsy. So let's say you are having this application. You require the session object. So this session factory, it is a pool for creating the session objects. You need to get one session object in your application. With the help of this, you can interact with the database. You can interact. Any operation you want to do on the database, for that, okay, you require a session object. So that is what we do. Session factory is it is associated with the pool of session objects. So this is again session object, session object. So this session object, it wraps a JDBC connection. If you see the session object, it wraps a JDBC connection. That is, it is used for establishing the connection with the database. This one, it is used for establishing this connection with the database. So if you have to open up any connection with the database, you will be making use of the session object that will help you open up the connection with the database and perform the transaction. So it is created with the help of session. It represents a short-lived session. It is used for communicating with the database. Like it wraps a JDBC connection object. That is, like you can map that to your connection object. Connection con is equal to driver manager dot get connection. It is equivalent to that. That is why we are saying it is used for opening up the connection with the database. First level cache and second level cache. This we are not going to discuss as of now. So is this clear? Is the session factory and the session clear? Okay, fine. Now persistent objects and then the collection. Persistent object, it represents your business data. It is associated with one session. They are serializable and can be transferred over the network. So let's say you have created a student object and it has got few fields X, Y, Z, and you want to store this in the database. So this object is called as persistent object. Now after this object is persisted in the database. Let's say this is some information profile, etc. And this object you want to send it over the network. You can send this object over the network. It can be serialized. You can send this object onto the network and then it can be displayed onto the browser. Some X, Y, and then Z information. And this objects, persistent objects, it represents the business data and they are associated only with one session. And then transaction, like it represents a logical unit of work. You need to specify where your transaction starts and where your transaction ends. And this transaction object, it will abstract the application from the underlying database logic. We'll discuss about this. So single thread object and to represent a unit of work. Like you want to perform some update operation, some delete operation. You want to perform update and delete. So that is represented with the help of a transaction. And then again, the connection provider you have, factory or pool of the JDBC connection object abstracts the application from the underlying database/data source and it can be extended. Transaction factory, you will not be using it. The transaction object will be using a transaction factory. It will help you get the transactions. A factory of transaction instances and is not exposed to the application. You will not be able to access this. And in the instance states, you have got transient, persistence, and the detached. So transient is the first one. You have just created it. And when you are calling session.save, when you're trying to save it, then it moves to the persistent state. Primary key. When it is in the transient state, it is not associated with the session object. It is not associated with the session and it does not have the primary key for it. And when you are invoking save method in that, the hibernate framework will create the primary key for the object and the state of the object is changed to the persistent state. And when you are closing the session, then the object moves to the detached state. Changes are not reflected in the database. The object moves to the detached state. Now, transient state means this is what? If you see, you have got the persistence context and then the object, and it is not associated with the persistent concept because it is not having the primary key. Object is just created, car C is equal to new car, and it does not have the primary key. It does not have the primary key associated with that. Now, in the persistent state, the object is managed. That is, this object will be there in the persistent context, the object. From here, the object is moved to the persistence context, and this object will have a row in the database. So this is persistent. So the instance is currently associated with the persistence context, and it is managed. That is, if you are making any changes to this, the changes will be reflected over here if the object is associated with the persistence context. In the detached state, the session is closed. Over here you're calling the session as closed. So the object is not associated with the persistence context. Over here, you're calling session dot close. So the object is not associated with the persistent context. And if you are making any changes, let's say your application is making any changes to this object, let's say something X instead of BMW, you are changing it to something XXX because it is detached, it is not associated with the persistent context, the changes is not reflected over here. It is not going to change over here. If in case if it was associated with the persistent context, now if it was associated, if you are making any changes, let's say X, 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 the changes will be made over here, X, X, and then X, and then the changes will be made over here. Clear with this? In the detached state, the session is closed, the object is no longer associated. So this object will become the detached state. This is called as detached because it is not associated with the persistent context. Is it clear? Persistent state and the detached state. Okay, fine. When the object is detached, you will not have any sync between the object and the database. When it is associated with the persistence context, then the object and the database row is synced. So now let us write the code. So first we need to configure your Java project to use Hibernate. So when we are using the Hibernate configuration, first you need to create a Hibernate configuration file. Wherein you need to specify which database you're using, whether you're using Oracle, MySQL, Derby, what is the name of the database you're using, what is the type of the database, like which version, and then you need to specify the configuration settings, that is the driver name, the URL, username, and the password, then classes or the Hibernate mapping files, which the application will handle. So configuration. So if you have to configure your Hibernate application, you can either go with the programmatic configuration or you can go with the XML configuration of properties. Most of the time, okay, you will be going with the XML configuration. So in programmatic configuration, if you see, okay, you will make use of an object called configuration object. To this configuration object, you will be adding all the indexes. So dialect is the name of the database what you're using, and then like okay, you will specify the driver class, you will be specifying the connection URL, you will specify the username, you will specify the password. That is, if you are creating the configuration object programmatically, you need to create a configuration object and set all its properties. This will come, we'll discuss about this later because we did not discuss about the mapping files. And then okay, if you're going with the XML configuration, this is how you will do it. You will write the same information in the properties file. Sorry, in the XML configuration file. Session factory. Now this is the configuration. Username, password, specify the database you're using, show SQL, auto generation of SQL statements, and what it is going to map, or what are the objects that it is going to persist. And then next step is you require the session factory. So as we said, you have the configuration object, and then with the help of the configuration object, okay, you will create the session factory. Once the session factory is created, this configuration object is discarded. Now then again, you need to specify and create the JDBC session. So Hibernate session object represents a unit of work. So one thread is associated with one session. It is a thread based. For one thread, okay, it will create one session. So this is how you will create it. Session is equal to factory.open session. So you have got session factory over here. So session factory will have pool of session objects. So this is one. So if your application requires a session object, you can request from this. So the request can be done by calling this method. Factory.openSession will give you a session object. Clear with this? So your session factory will host the session objects, and your session object will wrap a JDBC connection object. Simple. So once you have opened the session, then you can start performing all the operations. So over your factory.open session transaction, begin the transaction and then the commit the transaction. If any exception occurs, you have to close the session. Uh, and then connection pooling. Now for the connection pooling concept, you can specify the connection pool size, maximum number of pools, and you need to specify the pool name and all, whatever you are using. So the Hibernate, by default, the Hibernate will provide a Hibernate pooling algorithm that you should not use for performance reason. You should use any other good pooling algorithm. By default, Hibernate will provide a Hibernate pooling algorithm for just for learning purposes. It's okay, but in the production environment, we don't use the pooling algorithm provided by the Hibernate. You have to make use of other third-party algorithms. So you can use C3P0, that is a third-party tool for the connection pooling. So if you're using another third-party pool for connection pooling, you need to specify that. So we are using C3P0. This is the third-party pooling algorithm. So that we are using. So minimum, maximum timeout is 180, and it should support some 50 statements. So you should not use the default pooling algorithm. You can configure your application. So you can configure to use JNDI as well. Okay. So let us start with this because basics we have completed. So first is you need to set up the project. For that, okay, you need to download it from here. You need to download all the jar files from the Hibernate website, and you need to download the Hibernate plugin from the Eclipse Marketplace. Create the Java project, add the Hibernate files to the jar project. Then you need to create the configuration file, create a Pojo class, create a Hibernate mapping file, and then finally test it. Now let us assume we have already downloaded. Next step is to uh, create the configuration file. So this is what we are doing. Okay, this you need not type it. This will be created automatically by the plugin. So let us just go through this. The configuration you have, configuration object, and then the session factory you have. The session factory will use all these details. Hibernate.connection.driver class, specify the name of the driver class, password, connection.url, URL to connect with the database, and the username, and what is the database you're using. And then the connection strategy, thread based, and echo all the executed SQL to the standard output. Show SQL is equal to true. That is the underlying statements that are being executed by the Hibernate framework. It should be printed onto the console. And HBM to DDL.auto. Automatically, you have got 4 options over here. We are using update. We will discuss about this. Drop and recreate the database schema on the startup update. And then the mapping class, that is your Hibernate framework is going to handle this object, is going to process this event object. Then you need to create a class, Pojo class. So event we are creating, long, it is mandatory you should have the primary key. So this ID will become the primary key, and the type, the name of the event and the date on which the event will be held. You can make it serialized if you want to transfer this data along the network, and you should have a public argument, no argument constructor, and then the setter and then the getter methods. Now this is what is your mapping file. Now over here, let's say this is your object and you want to map this to the table. This is your object, ID, title, and the date. This is your object, and you want to map this object to the table in the database. So
I
this
think a
mapping
question.
is, yes.
What was the XML you showed before, do we write this in the same file or
Which one? This one?
this? Yeah, this one.
Uh, this is the configuration file. It is having all the settings of your project that will be used by the Hibernate to create a session factory object.
Okay, so if we have, so here like you wrote mapping class event, right? The last line. So if we have like all the persistent objects will come here, have to be
Yes,
listed here.
yes, correct.
Oh, and then there you give a resource, which is the second file that you're showing now, right?
Yes.
Okay, this is the second file. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Now, over here, this is what we want to do. We want to map this object to this one. ID, you want to map it to ID. So this is how you're mapping. ID name is equal to. If in case, because this ID should be the primary key. Whenever you're persisting any object into the table, it is mandatory it should have the primary key. So this primary key you will do, what you specify it with the help of this. ID name is equal to ID, type is equal to long, column name is equal to ID, generator class is equal to assign. So if you're using this generator class is equal to assign, means automatically Hibernate framework should, oh sorry, we are using assign. So you have to assign the ID 100, 101. If you're using like increment or native, the system will generate by itself. And then the second property what you're having is property name is equal to title. This is your Java property and its data type what you're specifying as string, and this property is mapped to this column in the table, title column. This is mapped to this title column. So that is what we are specifying. Column name is equal to title. This is how we are mapping. And in the third case, you are mapping this data object to the state object. So your Hibernate mapping file is used for mapping the Java objects to the columns and the table. Is this clear?
I think I have a question. So
Yes.
in this case, the ID column, it
Hmm.
is, let's say it's the primary key. So we don't specify that ID is the primary key here, right? It's database. In the database, you will specify the primary key.
No.
Is it, or do we do it in the code here?
Yes. Over here, in the mapping file, if you're specifying this, like if you're writing any column under ID name is equal to ID. So whichever column you are writing under this one, under this ID tag, that will become the primary key of your table.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't pay attention to the ID tag. Okay.
Yeah. When you're
It's
writing
not a
this,
property tag, it's an ID tag. Okay.
yes, it is an ID tag. So automatically that column will become the primary key of the table. Now,
Okay, got
next, so first you will create the session factory. You require the session factory. The session factory is connected to this database. One session factory object will hold connection to one database. Using this session fact, it will have a pool of session objects, and you, like whenever you want to perform any operation, if you see you need to request for one session object from the session factory. Hibernate util dot get session factory dot open session. So when you're calling this open session, it will give you one session object. So you will get one session object from the session factory, and when you want to start with the transaction, so you need to request the session object to provide you with a transaction that will help you perform all your, that will help you let you start your unit of work, that is insert, update, delete, whatever you want to do. And that is your transaction. You have to start the transaction. You have the event object over here, event.set title and the date. And when you're calling this session.save event, it will save this event to the database. Over here the row is inserted, ID, circus, and then what values. Over here if you see, okay, you're not using any insert statement. Sorry, we are not writing any SQL statement insert into, and we did not work with the prepaid statement and connection object. So all those statements will be generated by the underlying ORM framework. That is, Hibernate application will generate all those underlying SQL statements, and then finally, okay, you will commit the transaction. Clear with this? You'll start the transaction and then okay.
Is there a, so we did a commit transaction and then don't we need to close the session or it closes by itself?
No. You have to close the session.
Okay,
After
so
your
after
work is,
committing then we do.
yes, you need to close the session.
Oh, then the object is released back to the pool.
Yes. So once it is
Oh.
done, once your work is done, okay, it will release this, and okay, the object is released. It will move back into the pool.
So I can use the same session object to do multiple saves, right? Before I
Yes.
can close it.
Yes, you can use it for performing multiple transactions.
Okay. Cool. All
After
right.
when
Thank
you're
you.
calling session.close, as you said, it will move back to the pool. And then that is, it is like thread-based stuff. Then the thread is again destroyed.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. So now transaction shielding. So this is your session object, and then it depends, like red one is for the JPA and this is for the hibernate and then the IBATIS. Now for the transaction purpose, okay, you might be using the hibernate framework, or you might use the Java persistence API framework, or you might be using the IBATIS framework. Irrespective of the framework you're using, let's say in the first case you're using the hibernate framework. When you're using the hibernate framework, your statements will remain the same: start, save, and commit. You don't have to make any changes to that. So when you're using the hibernate framework, it will make use of the underlying hibernate transaction API. Now let's say from the hibernate framework, if I have switched to the Java persistence API framework. So if I'm switching from one framework to the another framework, but the code for the transaction will remain the same: start, save, and then the commit. You're not making any changes to this. So if you have, like, because these are three different frameworks: JPA, Hibernate, and IBATIS. These three frameworks may have different logic in order to handle the transactions. They may have different underlying logic to handle the transactions. So we are not concerned about the underlying logic that is responsible for handling the transaction. So your application, the Hibernate application, that is what we call it as transaction shielding. So whatever is the underlying logic that is taking place by each of the framework in specific to handle the transaction, we need not bother about that. So you just have to specify start, save, and then the commit. The underlying logic will change from, like, let's say this is some underlying logic. So this will change from framework to framework. So you don't have to bother about that. You don't have to bother like how it is taking care of uh, handling the transactions internally. So that is what we call it as transaction shielding.
I'll take a question.
Hmm.
So if we change the ORM, because the ORM framework, we will need to do some code modifications, right?
In configuration file you have to do.
No, but then what about, because we had written hibernate util.get session, but if I'm
Oh,
using JPA, there might be, I don't know, something JPA util
yes,
or
yes.
something.
Yes, that code modification you have to do. But transaction shielding, what we mean is the underlying law, like you, like, generally, let's say, okay, you have got begin and commit. We do when you're going with the begin and the commit. Let's say, okay, if you're giving the rollback, if you have written the rollback, if you're writing all by yourself, let's say, okay, this is associated with the another object. This might be associated with the another object. So you have to, when you are rolling back this parent object, you need to roll back manually. You need to write the code to roll back this, as well as, okay, you should take care, okay, it should go to its previous states. Let's say from X it was modified to Y, and then from, okay, P it is modified to Q. Because if the transaction is rolled back, then you should get back the previous state. So Y should be rolled back to X, and then Q should be rolled back to P. So internal states of the object should be a rollback. So you don't have to write that logic. So this will be done by this framework.
Right. Another question, the session that we get, is
Mhm.
that session object like common across ORM frameworks, or it is specific, like the session that you showed before, is it specific to like Hibernate session and then JPA has its own session object, or it's one common
No, no, it is
session?
specific to Hibernate.
Okay. Okay, fine.
It is specific to Hibernate. For JPA, you'll use Entity Manager.
Okay, thank you.
And the other stuff is, okay, again, what we mean by transaction shielding is, let's say your application is connecting with two databases. It is a huge application connecting with two databases. So here also some modification you have done, here also some modification. So you need to roll back at this point, as well as, okay, you need to roll back the changes whatever you have made at this. So when you just give the rollback, if the transaction fails and if this rollback has to happen, your transaction shielding, that is the framework, will take care of rolling this back as well as this. So this is the advantage we get. Okay, before we proceed, let us just so you can go to this Eclipse marketplace, OEA help, and then you go to the Eclipse marketplace. So OEA, search for the plugin Hibernate. Happen JBus is not listed. It is unable to search from here. You can go with install new software. JBoss Hibernate tool. So we require that URL. So this is the plugin what we need to download. So go over here and in this available site Hibernate, click OK, and then again you need to search this. Site might have changed. You'll get the plugin link, but I don't know why. Okay, let me do it manually so that will be more clear. Then I'll show you how to do it with the. So file, new, you can create a simple Java project. You can use it with both with core Java as well as the web application. We'll hibernate test, click here, okay. So in the next step, what you have to do is you need to add all the jar files, click on the properties. You need to download the jar files from the Hibernate website. Click add build path, add library, user library, okay, and then okay, you have got Hibernate 5. Click finish and then click OK. So all the jar files are added, and the next step is to create the configuration file, which is an XML file. Click onto the source project and then click other. XML file, next click. So this name is hibernate.config.xml. Click next, finish. So now you need to create this Hibernate mapping file. What is this one? This is the file what we are going to create, Hibernate configuration file. So Hibernate, Hibernate configuration, and then you need to create a session factory. Oh shit. Session factory, and then okay, you need to keep on adding the properties. Property name is equal to, I hope, yes. So hibernate dot connection dot driver underscore class. So the name of the driver you need to specify. So com dot mysql dot jdbc dot driver, and then next property name is equal to hibernate, sorry, HIBER, hibernate dot connection dot URL. So what is that URL? I don't remember. JDBC colon MySQL localhost. Your port number is 3306. So at the end we'll write that. And the next property what you have is name is equal to hibernate dot connection dot username, that is root, and like whatever is the username and password at your end, we need to configure that. Property name is equal to hibernate dot connection dot password is again root, and property name is equal to hpm2 auto ddl, hpm2 ddl dot auto. Automatically it should create the statement, it should drop and recreates the table, and whatever SQL statements it is generating internally, show under hibernate, I think it is. Okay, only show SQL. Show underscore SQL. It is. So what is this? JDBC colon MySQL. Okay, fine. So JDBC colon MySQL colon localhost colon port number is 3306. Database name is it. So clear with this? So this is the basic stuff what we require. You need to provide the name of the driver class, URL, username and the password. So it should automatically create the tables, and whatever underlying statement is generating to create the tables, that should be set to true. So after you have created this, next is you need to create a class, let's say event. So let me drop this and let us create this in a package. Click new class com.example.model and event. So private integer event ID. Let us stick to the example what we have discussed. Private string title, private date. Control Shift O to add the statements. Alt Shift S. Create a constructor, default constructor, because that is what it requires. And you need to generate, setter and indicator methods. Then your object is created. Now for this object to be mapped to the database, you need to create a hibernate mapping file. So right click, new, other, next. So event dot hbm stands for hibernate mapping file dot xml. So this is the mapping file you need to create. After you've created this, hibernate mapping file and then specify rest of the stuff. So you will be creating the hibernate mapping file. So hibernate hyphen mapping. Class, which class you are mapping? So the name of the class is com.example.model.event. And then okay, you can always specify the name of the table, whatever name you want. So the name of the table, I want to keep it as event. If you don't specify also, it will create the table with the same name as that of the class. If you want an alternate name, then you can specify. ID, property what we are mapping is ID, and its type is, I think we took it as integer. Yes. So type is equal to integer. And column what we are mapping is, column name is equal to ID, and generator class is equal to assigned. That is, you need to assign the primary key. The other two properties what we have is, property name is equal to, what is that? Title and then the date. Property name is equal to title, and the corresponding column name is equal to title. Property name is equal to date, and the corresponding column is equal to, because date is a data type, so we will be using event date. So with this, okay, your Hibernate mapping file is ready. You need to create one more file called Hibernate utility class. Hibernate. Here you will be creating the session factory object because it is one-time process. So public static final session factory. Public static return the instance of the session factory. Now you need to create the session factory object. You can make use of the static initializer. So first, as we said, okay, you require this configuration is equal to new configuration RA. So over here you will create a configuration. So once you have created this, then configuration dot this. So build session factory, it will give you a session factory object. Clear with this? So over here you can specify the name of the file. By default, okay, it will take, okay, if you're having more than one configuration file, then you can specify over here. If you don't specify, by default the Hibernate will read the hibernate.config.xml file. Sorry. So configuration dot. Over here you need to write configure dot configure. So if you don't write, by default it will take Hibernate, or if you're having, you can specify the name of the file. If you don't specify, by default it will take Hibernate config file. Now with this, your session object is ready. Now you need to test this. Right click new. So let us test this. Event test. So public static void create event. You need to get reference to the session factory. That we will do it with the help of Hibernate util. Hibernate util dot get session factory. Control Shift O. After you have received this, and then okay, you need to open this session. After you have opened this session, keep your event object. Event is equal to new event, and then event dot set ID, let's say 1, and then event dot set title movie show or something, and then event dot set date is equal to new date. Control Shift O, Java dot, sorry, it should be Java dot util. So after you have done this, you need to open a session object, session dot, sorry, get set a session dot get transaction dot begin, and then session dot get transaction dot commit. So over here you can write the code session dot save of event object, and then once you have saved the event object, you will close it. You can close the session as well. Print the message object saved, and then you can close this. Right click. Okay, you need to add the SQL jar. Let us test. Right click, run as. Okay, right click. Oh, sorry, main method we did not write. So let us write the main method and call this method create event. Run as Java application. Okay, you need to add the driver file. Right click, properties, and Java build file, add external Java file. Go to the location where file is there. MySQL. Run as Java application. Okay, that is spelling mistake. It is MySQL. So unknown entity come that example dot this thing. Okay, you need to specify it in this file that you are going to map this. So mapping resource is equal to, you need to specify the fully qualified name of the class. So com slash example slash hibernate slash, oh sorry, com slash example slash model slash event dot hbm dot x. See over here. So we did not created any table. Hibernate, this is like over here if you see, hibernate has created the table, create table event id integer not null for title and then the event date. And because we have specified primary id annotation, id attribute for this, thing. So this has been considered as the primary key of the table, and it has inserted the values, insert into event title, event date and value, and then finally object C. We can cross check our results in the database, or enter the password, use the name of the database, and then select star from event. Correct. Recorded. Clear with this? So with this, we have just completed one simple basic application and Hibernate. So this is what you have to create. You have to create an object and you have to create the corresponding mapping file and then process it. We will be checking the other way of doing it through the annotations in the next class. I'll wind up for today, and please download all the jar files and just create one simple application using Hibernate. So that will be helpful for you in the coming sessions.